I think there's more. We can keep it fairly informal.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. For those of you at the back, feel free to come forward. I think it's going to be a nice, informal, intimate session. Here, I guess people are having lunch as well, but the fewer, then we can have more of a conversation than a presentation. So, marhaba, welcome to the session on mapping global EdTech innovations. I'm here with a couple of different hats. So I'm Atish Gonzalez. I'm the Education Innovation Lead for the International Rescue Committee. It's an international humanitarian organization that was founded by Albert Einstein and works in 40 countries in crisis and conflict situations. I'm also the founder of the Gamerteca platform and app. I'll hand over to my co-panelists to introduce themselves as well.
Thanks, Atish. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeremy. Looking forward to chatting with you, maybe learning a bit about you as well. I'm with Handshake. We're a resilient transformation consultancy. That's just our word for innovating with thought for the holistic system in the long term. And I'm here with my co-founder, Joseph.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. I'm Joseph. I lead operations at Handshake. And like Jeremy mentioned, we like to call ourselves a resilient transformation organization. So, yeah.
Great. And hi, everyone. I'm Jackie Strecker. I work with the UN Refugee Agency, and I lead our global work on connected education.
I must also add that I've worked with all of these fun and very interesting and smart colleagues over the last 10 years or so in various different roles. So
are they coming later, the smart and
they're
interesting ones?
coming later, yeah. so here and during the session, but afterwards, I also encourage you to chat to them as well. So I'll start at a very high level in terms of the work that we started IRC around education innovation. So our work on education innovations has three sort of pillars of approaches that we're taking. And the first approach really, and this is tying into our 100-year strategy, is around localization. So it's quite an important theme for us, but I think there's been a lot of talk about localization, but now through innovation, we're really trying to sort of work with and through local organizations, particularly when you're talking about EdTech startups, when we're talking about educators in the countries we're working in. And through some of the work we've done, especially in Nigeria, we'll talk about how that's come to life. We're working on platform-based approaches, so we're trying to look at EdTech from a perspective of how do we move from programs, thinking about EdTech interventions per program in a specific country and context, but moving to more global solutions which can be scaled and reach large number of out-of-school children. And finally, on our research and development agenda, so I work out the Airbell Impact Lab of IRC, which focuses a lot on innovation, but also on the evidence generation aspect. So just as an example, so on the evidence generation side, we have a project called Pop-Up Learning, which is using sort of autonomous learning tablet-based solutions in Bangladesh and Tanzania. And so we've been sort of piloting this approach, but we've also been trying to generate evidence, running RCTs, for example, on whether this approach works or not. And the whole hypothesis around this was that when during an emergency, when there's no teacher, can some type of EdTech intervention support in that sort of scenario? And another intervention which we're trying in Colombia, this was around Venezuelan refugee children who are in Colombia and who were trying to sort of have some type of remedial educational outcomes. We were using WhatsApp-based messaging to provide them some type of support, some type of teacher and facilitator support as well on very simple low-tech devices. So this is the project which started specifically in Colombia, but now we're trying to scale it beyond the Colombian context as well. So I wanted to share these as examples because these are examples of things that we started to do from, let's say, at a global level. And then we were keen to sort of understand, and this was at the start of COVID, then Jeremy and I had this conversation saying, but what else is happening out there? There's been a number of mapping initiatives that have happened, but we are keen to understand what's happened in the sector, what's happened outside of the sector, and what can we learn from EdTech more globally, and what of that can we apply within our work. So Jeremy, I'll hand over to you to talk a little bit about what you found through this EdTech mapping process, and then we're excited also to launch an atlas and wiki here as well. So over to you.
Yeah, we were reflecting on how it was surprisingly not well known how big the EdTech sector was already in Nigeria. And we brought together about 9 researchers on this one. One of the biggest surprises was just, you think all of the internet is in every language, or that all of it's on the English language internet, but we had people searching in Mandarin and Hindi, in Spanish, in French and Russian, and a long list, Arabic, and the way that different markets have different kinds of content and the kinds of innovation we uncovered approaching in that way was pretty surprising. And so that was a lot of motivation for the EdTech Open Atlas, which is now an open visual wiki that anyone can add to. We have about 200 or 300 that we found around the world with different information. It's an exploratory tool for anyone to kind of tap in and find new EdTech innovation. So if you go on there and you see one that's missing, please add it and go ahead. And we're excited to build on that over time.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. So the idea of the mapping was just they did this massive scan, and whatever's missing, please do contribute. I think that's sort of our pitch to you here, is to say this is what we found, what's missing, please do add to it. So then I'll hand over to Joseph. So moving from that global perspective, then we moved into in our work in Nigeria, and specifically Northeast Nigeria as well. So Joseph will talk us through the design sprint, but also almost like a mini incubation process we ran with a number of EdTech startups there.
Thank you, Atish. So we wanted to work with local solutions and the IRC Nigeria team to sort of like solve some of the problems that we're having on the ground. So what we did was we first off decided that we're not going to reinvent the wheel. So we're going to work with people who were already on the ground that had solutions that worked, and see if there are ways to tweak it to ensure that it solves the problems that or some of the complications that the IRC Nigeria team had on the ground. We had a series of design sprints with the IRC Nigeria team and other stakeholders, trying to first off just isolate some problem statements that they were having, some of which you can find, I think we're making it open, yeah? So you can find some of that. We then began to map those problem statements to some of the solution partners that already had something on the ground, right? We did research and we found over, I think, 60 solution partners who were working on various EdTech solutions, doing various things. Then we sent an open invite. Here are the problem statements that the IRC Nigeria team has, right? Tell us how your solution can help solve some of these problems. And we got some submissions back, and then we did a prioritization mapping, right? So where we are looking at two things. So the first was feasibility. Just how feasible is this solution that this company is offering? Is it feasible in like the north or in our context? And also we looked at desirability, right? Because it didn't make sense to work on something that the country team was not excited about, right? They had to be excited for the projects to run, for the pilots to run. And then we ended up with just 4 startups that met the need for desirability and feasibility. And then we ran them through a very interesting workshop, mini incubator. It was mostly a blend of synchronous and asynchronous meetings, which I'll talk about sometime later. But we did that, and then after that, they then submitted an upgraded pitch back to us where it was, now we know, here's what you think your solution can do. Now here's what the IRC goals are. Then they sent like an updated pitch, and then we did some more prioritization and ended up with 2 solutions partners, like we call them, that we're going to like run a pilot through. beginning January next year.
So this could be a good opportunity maybe to showcase
Yeah.
those two partners, and yeah, we wanted them to be here as well, but yeah, a number of logistical challenges.
Do you mind if I frame a little bit about this? So something that we're excited about with these two companies is that they are both commercial companies that we sourced that happen to have overlapping needs. And I don't know much about other markets, but Nigeria specifically is doesn't matter what level of wealth you have, all the infrastructure is bad. So a lot of the commercial companies are already building for what we would normally associate with the humanitarian context. And so we built the process of sourcing them actually from our work with governments and defense ministries. There's a concept called dual use, where it originally started with militaries, but has a lot of applications to the humanitarian sector. If a company is dependent on you for funding, then you don't get economies of scale, because even when you don't need the product, you still have to fund them. And then if you don't, they go away and you have to build it from scratch again. So the ideal, which is hard to achieve, but sometimes possible, is to find companies that are commercially viable, that have a market outside of you, that then they have a product line that applies to you. So these companies, Hitch, for instance, works with textbook companies and is a distribution partner for them with private schools in Nigeria. Mavis does similar stuff. And now we're helping them bridge to the humanitarian sector, and did that through the sourcing that Joseph led.
Just to also add to that, Hitch recently got into the Google Startup for Africa. So they're one of, I think, the first 50 organizations in Africa that Google is going to be bringing into their incubator to sort of like expand their product offering.
Great. No, thanks for the insights. And we'll get a bit more into how we sort of went around selecting these organizations, but also it's quite a vibrant space, and there are many other organizations as well that we identified there. But I'll hand over to Jackie to talk a little bit about UNHCR's Connected Education program. So Jackie, over to you.
Great. So just picking up on the excellent work that's been done by my colleagues here, UNHCR has also really invested in design sprints and looking at human-centered design. And we've had this work throughout UNHCR's portfolio for some time, but this really got accelerated with the formation of the Innovation Service in 2012. What I've got featured on the slide here are just some of the more recent initiatives that we had. So in 2020, off the back of the COVID pandemic, we actually did a design sprint, and this was with support from the EdTech Hub, Can't Wait to Learn, Education Cannot Wait, and IDEO.org, and together we were able to crowdsource different solutions that could actually help us look at how we could extend continuous learning opportunities to refugee hosting communities, because often what we found was when the schools closed down, the different initiatives that were trying to target continuous learning weren't actually making it to refugee communities. And so we did a great crowdsourcing campaign. We had many different solutions that were presented to us, and from those we took 13 through an interactive design sprint phase, working with these different partners and really looking at how we could test those designs with communities, and then ended up funding 3 of them to put their solutions into practice. We also have right now ongoing a program called the Humanitarian Education Accelerator program. And this program is it's our phase 2. It's a very important program for us because it's looking at taking innovations and helping them scale, but also building an evidence base on that scaling practice. So others within the sector can learn about what it takes to really scale innovations, moving from pilots to full-fledged scale. We then also, throughout all of our programming that relates to EdTech, which we call connected education, we do community-based design practices. And so on the screen, you're seeing a partnership that we have with Vodafone Foundation around the Instant Network School programs. The photo is from a design sprint we did with the community in Mozambique to really involve leaders within the schools that we were working in to really shape the design of our EdTech intervention. And then the last one is what I'd like to focus on just briefly, and this is a provocation experiment that we've been doing with Radical with support from Dubai Cares in the lead up to Rewired. So on the next slide here, you'll see some of the virtual design sprints that we were doing with a whole host of actors from the EdTech community. And what we were trying to get at is trying to understand what are some of the core principles for designing for inclusion from the start. So as we're looking at different EdTech solutions, as Jeremy said, you know, sometimes there's applications within the humanitarian sector that people aren't necessarily thinking about. But sometimes also when people are designing programs, they're not thinking about low resource contexts. And that's really important to make sure that these continuous learning initiatives and all of these programmings can reach some of the hardest to reach communities. So on the next slide here, you'll see the results of our initial brainstorm. We're going to put this into sort of a digital playbook, but it's going to be an ongoing process throughout 2022 to really define this and look at what does it mean to design for inclusion of refugee and forcibly displaced communities, and those hosting them in low resource contexts to be included within our EdTech initiative. So this is very much a working prototype, and we really invite people to join with us to help us iterate more on this so that we can make this as a guide and a resource for ministries, for UN actors, for partners, and educators on the ground.
Great, thanks Jackie. So that's pretty much, I think, our talking points to you. So we're quite keen to have a bit of a discussion with you. But first, we're going to try this technically. We had the six sort of themes that we distilled from this global mapping exercise that we did. So I'm just going to maybe first bring up the 6 themes again before we switch over to the Mentimeter, just so that you can see them again. Jeremy, do you want to just very quickly touch on the 6, like in 5 seconds each, before people vote on them?
Yeah, it's like speed dating for EdTech trends. Each of these was distilled out of the mapping we did with the 9 researchers from the global examples, and then there's a process for folks who want to localize to their context to take the broader trends and make them more specific. The new Pedagogies for peer learning is about processes and new evidence-based approaches for learning that can be related to electronics or not. Portable credentials is about ways of proving that you know what you know and ways of moving that across institutions or borders connected to or even disconnected from institutional identity. New models of financial support is about these kind of blended concepts we're talking about, cross-industry, cross-humanitarian, ways of funding that are creative and have different incentive models like pay for success bonds or social impact financing. Personalized and contextualized learning, that's about taking data, both personal and global, and using it to deliver people content that is specific to what they need when they need it. Localized virtual learning is about actually connectivity and bringing the internet, making it more of an internets, bringing content local, but still distributable, and even if it's disconnected from the wider internet. And then interactive and immersive learning is about whether that immersiveness comes from a VR headset or from a caretaker with more tools to deliver the education they want, new ways of engaging with students and between students and between teachers.
Thanks for the speed run through. And it's always hard to do this in these short sessions. I would encourage you, the report is online as well. So I'd encourage you to look at the trends, but also examples. They've selected some really good examples that align with these 6 trends. So let's try this. So don't switch over to the Mentimeter yet. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to try to scan this with your phone. So you just take out your phone, try to scan the QR code. It should pop up like a Mentimeter poll. So what we want to see is of the 6 that we just went through, and feel free to ask us if some of them are not clear. So we want to see which ones resonate the most with you. So and so you'll be able to sort of rank order them. And once you've done that, then we'll switch over to the Mentimeter Live.
Now we know we're innovating because there's a QR code.
Exactly. This is, I think, the most technically complex thing I did not want to attempt here. Okay, let's try to switch over to the Menti. And if you have not been able to scan the QR code, you should be able to also go to menti.com on your phone and type in the code. So we're keen to sort of see your polling, and then we can have a bit more of an open discussion. Ooh.
Ooh.
The votes are starting to come in.
Nice. I thought we were done.
Interesting.
It's funny, but I've done a lot of these live polls, and the way that the distribution shapes up when you have people able to see it versus not, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, there's some bias happening here, some group bias.
This perfectly representative group of global opinion.
As the votes are coming up, maybe I'll ask my co-panelists as well. What do you think of the votes you're seeing? So you're seeing personalized and contextualized learning sort of coming to the top. Do you see that resonate with your work at UNHCR?
Absolutely. I think that would be number one for me as well. Although I would say often in low resource environments, that's hard to do. Mainly because often they require a lot of connectivity or bandwidth. We've seen solutions that work offline, like Calibri, that allows for some of these pieces, which I think are quite promising. But it's also really important that we provide the right training for teachers on how to leverage these resources as well, or for parents or for students, because sometimes they're not tapped into. But that would be my first as well.
The second one is quite interesting as well on portable credentials. There's been a lot of excitement around things like blockchain and open badges over the years, looking both at students in terms of like their lost credentials, their paper credentials they can't bring over borders, but also increasingly for teachers and teacher professional development around some type of recognition of skills and more formal certification. So that's an interesting one that's popped up there. Any other reflections from Joseph, you or Jeremy?
I think what you were talking about with how you redesigned the incubator fits into the localized virtual learning.
Yeah, so what we figured out during the first design sprint was that it was going to be very difficult to get everybody in the room at the same time with very good connection, and because we're dealing with people who were up north. It's possible that they don't have power for 3 months on end. So internet is actually very shaky there. So getting the actual stakeholders at the same room with great internet was going to be very difficult. So synchronize the meetings, like a Zoom chat would be very difficult to get everybody in. Also, we were planning to use tools like Miro, because in our line of work, if it's not a Miro, it didn't happen, right? But that also wasn't easy for people to use, because there's a learning curve in learning how to use Miro before you could then use Miro to collaborate. So we decided to move it off to WhatsApp. WhatsApp is very ubiquitous in Nigeria and maybe most parts of the world. Everybody has a WhatsApp account, so we created a WhatsApp group, and then we used WhatsApp kind of the way that people use Google Docs, right? So where you collaborate on WhatsApp. During the sessions, people are on Zoom. We would take the comments or the questions that we needed people to answer and move it over to WhatsApp. And then the people who couldn't join the Zoom call would then share their thoughts on WhatsApp. And sometimes, because I currently live in Nigeria, I could do a local call and be like, hi, I didn't get your opinions on this. Now we're on the call together. Can you share your opinions with me? And then I'll take all of that feedback and input and then move it to Miro. And that way we had very, very robust inputs from all the people we need to get inputs from.
Great, thanks, Joseph. So I'm conscious of time. I'm keen to go to the audience soon, but I just have a couple of questions for the panel. So just building on this, Jackie, so looking at the connected education programs and some of the harsher refugee contexts that you're working in, what do you see as some of those barriers then? But then looking at this, what excites you the most, saying some of this could work in some of those contexts that you're operating in?
Absolutely. I mean, I think some of the barriers I've mentioned already, so some of the solutions aren't necessarily designed for low resource contexts, and often, even where we do have connectivity, often it's unreliable, or we're not sure if it can be quite consistent. So if a teacher or if a student is relying on that to be able to engage and learn or hold a classroom session, that can be very challenging when that goes down for them to adapt and iterate. So I think for us, some of the solutions that have taken that into consideration and have functionality that can work offline within those contexts, and then leverage connectivity when you do have it, I think have been really exciting. So I mentioned Calibri. I know we've got Mike from Usted Mobile here as well, who's doing some really great work. I think there's a ton of programs that are out there, and I like, Jeremy, what you said before. I think the more that we can have people designing for these environments and designing for them from the start means that you can leverage, really exciting innovations and technology to bring really immersive and fantastic dynamic learning environments, not just to the places that have the resources and the connectivity to be able to access them, but across every setting, right? And so if we're designing for some of those more challenging contexts, it's going to work across different environments altogether.
Great, thanks, Jackie. And Jeremy, maybe to you. So as you and the researchers from your teams have scanned a number of different linguistic contexts and geographies and various sort of areas looking for the interesting EdTech innovations, what's the one thing that surprised you as you were looking at this sort of the existing solutions which are out there?
What surprised, besides the beat drop? I'll quickly speak to that, and then would love to hear what we missed from the audience. But I think mesh networking is a huge opportunity. The hardware is white labeled, the software is open source, and you can transmit high bandwidth content using it. So we don't really have an excuse not to use it. When you don't have electricity, of course, that's a big barrier. But there's no reason why high quality video content or interactive content can't be transmitted over 3-5 miles, something like that, using readily available tech.
Cool. Yeah, definitely a lot of interesting applications. As we're moving more of the stuff online, we have to think of connectivity solutions that can address some of these solutions. Joseph, maybe you touched a bit on the process to identifying some of these partners, just quite a complex process in itself. Maybe you talk about how, because we started this during COVID and you had to adapt through this process, so maybe you can talk a little bit about how you went about the process and what were the adaptations you had to make.
All right, like I mentioned earlier, Nigeria is actually very, very unique in the sense that like Jeremy mentioned, regardless of whatever status you're in, infrastructure is quite bad across board, right? But there are certain places that are actually worse than, so for instance, if you stay in a city like Lagos State, Lagos City, you have like pretty much the best internet you can find in the country in Lagos. But if you stay in a place like Borno where there's like crisis with Boko Haram and there's just like much more levels of poverty and kids who are displaced, getting internet is actually quite a struggle. So we'd come in thinking we were going to have everyone on a Zoom call and then we'd use Miro. That was the plan. But we sort of needed to adapt the plan to get inputs because we figured out that before we start thinking about solutions, ensuring that we're even hitting at the actual problems that the country team on the ground was actually facing was very important. For instance, one of the biggest challenge for the teachers up north is that they don't have any sort of role models that they can see and relate to that prove that going to school or being educated is a good thing, right? So that's something that we would not have thought about. So getting those inputs, or for instance, it was surprising to me that there was a yearning from people up north to get educational materials when in the past you would think that they would usually chase people away because it wasn't part of their culture. So some of those things were inputs that we got just because we're able to tweak our process to get as much input as possible. And so localizing, so having a plan, Zoom, Miro, whatever, but like localizing that plan to ensure that you're getting inputs from the ground, I think it's really important and was key during this process.
And thanks, Joseph. And I must add that in addition to the local EdTech startups and the local country team, we also work with an education partner called Chad in there as well. And I think their inputs were really valuable in understanding the needs and the context that we were going to work in as well. So I think that's sort of from our side. We're keen to hear from all of you as well, which in terms of the mapping, some of the barriers that Jackie mentioned, some of the possible solutions. So keen to hear from you. What's also missing here that you see from your work?
Hi, thank you for all that. That was all very interesting. I think you got the big points. One thing I see missing in the donor and government-led space is really licensing and interoperability. And Jackie is not surprised by what I'm saying. It seems like we're funding a lot of things that people cannot freely reuse, which is very unfortunate. And freely reusing means both, being legally able to do it and from a technical point of view. And I don't see anything yet on like allowing systems to talk to each other. So we're moving to a place where, kids are not just using one app. There's lots of apps. So how do we enable these things to talk to each other?
Jackie, you want to start? Yeah.
Sure. So thanks for that, Mike. I think it's very, very relevant. And one of the recent sort of findings I've had in the conversations that when we've been working with governments is that there's also this assumption that a lot of the open educational resources or non-OERs that are out there, that they can actually take those and edit them and re-alter them for their own purposes. And I think not just ministries, but other educational providers have really stressed this as a need, especially as we look at contextualizing resources. And so I think having a better understanding of licensing and making that clear and making it quite pertinent from lobbying efforts and advocacy efforts for content producers to take very open licensing so that that real need can kind of be met. And then just to note on the interoperability side, I think this one is a little bit harder to tackle, but I think it's definitely something that also is a major priority on our side. Often we find, again, educators, students have a hard time moving between different platforms, different apps, different resources within their classrooms. And so they're looking for systems that they can access that have these pieces integrated together. And so when we're looking at sort of aggregate sites, it's really hard if there's not a notion of interoperability between them as well.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just going to add on the just building on Jackie's point, so that the discussion around open educational resources and interoperability is also, and I see this in the adult learning space and the K-12 space, has been stuck a little bit, let's say 10 years down the line, that there's a big focus on content. So how can you take these modules of content and make them available? The reality is a lot of the experiences, the learning experiences that are available are not so easily packaged into a zip file or some type of a resource which can be then made available. But doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. It just means that the approaches that have addressed OERs and sharing and interoperability previously don't work for those kinds of solutions which have adaptive learning for like kids at different ages, and it's offering AI-driven approaches, and you're absolutely right, it's driving a bit of a black box approach. You don't know what biases are behind the system in terms of offering different kids different levels of education, for example. So I think we need a more nuanced and sophisticated discussion on OERs and also on learning experiences and the sharing and interoperability. So
I hear what you're saying. With all due respect, I actually think that the tech side, I think what you're saying is enormously important and is very difficult because it's not a tech problem. I think that the tech is very interoperable. I don't see basically anything in the humanitarian space that isn't based fundamentally in open source technology with a wrapper around it, which is a good thing. I mean, even that pen that Mavis is using is a commercially available white label infrared pen you can buy. the reason why it's hard is because what's really not interoperable is identity, and that's not a tech problem. That's a government policy thing. And like you're saying with the content, moving videos around, moving text around, with WhatsApp, you can just press a button, it exports the entire chat, and you have all that content, all that media straight to your Google Drive. The hard part is getting that content to actually be valid institutionally in other places. I think this happens a lot with tech, especially like ethics of technology. Well, it's actually easy to make AI not racist. You just tell it to not be racist, and it does it because it's a computer. Like making people not racist, that's really hard. But I think that's the hard part of this too, is not really moving the content around technically. It's getting the social recognition.
Yeah, and I think there's also a whole discussion on licensing as well. That's also, I mean, there's obviously a preference for us to work with open source solutions and for have licensing models which can scale. But I think there are a number of commercial providers who are coming up with very good solutions in this space, but I think it is a tricky one if you aren't careful, because suddenly the program costs blow up or it's not sustainable as well. Any other questions, comments from the audience? Yes, so we have.
Hi, I'm Frankie. I work with Jackie in the Unhcr Connected Education team. I'm just interested around portable credits and hearing from you guys at Handshake just a little bit more about how that works and whether these are credits accredited by governments, especially related to blockchain.
Yeah, I'll start and then maybe you can build on Joseph. So there's the tech part and then the social part. Portable credentials, it's NFTs for people. It's a revolution. It basically allows for programmatic models of people representing that they've done something. And so what's beneficial about blockchain is that no one has to maintain it. It doesn't have to be on a central server somewhere, that if someone then throws away that server, the credential is gone. It's persistent and it's open on the internet. That doesn't make anyone care or believe that it's connected to you. So linking it to an identity and then getting someone to recognize it is a separate problem, but it reduces the infrastructure costs of storing it and tracking it quite a bit. So that's the opportunity there. In the most aggressive, or aggressive is not the right word, but there's profound self-learning that goes on in Nigeria, unlike any other place I've been, particularly in WhatsApp classes and ways that people leverage skills and kind of spin up their own classes and learning for monetization really quickly in marginal ways and otherwise. And some learning things where people like invest boot camps that will basically are free and then they get like a marginal percentage of your income for a certain amount of years, things like that. I know you're in the alternative education space a bit there.
Yeah, so I think key to that point is just the idea that I have learned how to do something. I know how to do something. I should be able to share with everyone or anyone anywhere that I know how to do this thing. And so it's also about like how we're credentialing new skills. For instance, there are new skills that people are learning how to do for the world that they currently live in or the context that they're currently in, that it's very difficult to like find a credential to like point at that, okay, I know how to do this stuff. So there's two parts where it's like, how do we first like solve that problem, but also then how is that credential that is then provided being able to like shared, we can share it with other people and it's globally recognizable. Yeah.
My experience with digital credentials has been it's sometimes, as you said, less of a technology problem. So there's a distributed method of whether it's blockchain or even open badges was verifiable but not distributed. But it's sometimes about who's issued the digital credential, so that matters. What have they issued it for? And is there some common language or currency of that skill? So does this digital badge or block represent an intermediate, advanced? Does it have an assessment tied to it? Does the provider of the badge have some type of a quality certification as well? So you can really sort of scale it up, but I think there are a few other pieces beyond the credential itself, which adds value to it. because the ultimate goal, I guess, I mean, when I see organizations using open badges and blockchain for credentialing, is are employers, are universities asking for this? If they're not, then it's not really working. So the day like employers and the day universities say, okay, to get into this program or just job, you need to have these 5 badges plus this 6th one, then it starts to work, then it starts to generate demand.
I don't know if we have time to just add like just one last point. In Nigeria, there's like a whole group of people who have sort of like lost faith in like the conventional educational models, and so they're looking to alternative education to learn skills that they need to like survive, for instance, skills that the employers are looking for. And so they're learning things like how to write code, how to design, and there's really no like credential for that. But employers in Nigeria are learning to like overlook certain things that they used to like consider important to like get talent in. For instance, they're now requesting for things like there's something called a portfolio, right? So if you're a designer, show me something you've done on GitHub, so that your GitHub account is your portfolio, right? So you don't need to tell me that you know how to write something, just send me that, I look at it, and then from looking at that, I'm able to tell that you're indeed skilled at doing that. So that's one model that's really sort of like taking hold in like tech space in like Nigeria and some other spaces, but that's something to think about when we think about portable credentials.
And you also took an alternative pathway,
right? In about I think 4 years ago, I started like college wasn't working for me, so I decided to like drop out, not because I want to be Steve Jobs, but like take alternative routes to learn the things that I wanted to learn. And so I now do research and a bit of operations, and I think it's working out for me just because I have access, but also I'm able to create my own curriculum, right? So what I want to learn, so things that don't necessarily match when you think about getting a degree. For instance, I like business and I like law. 2 things that generally don't meet, but I can take a course in business and then take a course in law, and then I've learned both things and then apply them in ways that I want to apply them. That might not be really like possible when I'm like in a college. So that's something that I've also done personally.
Thanks, Joseph. Yeah, no, and thanks for the questions. I think we are getting wrapped out of here. Thanks so much for attending. Thanks so much for your engagement. Do access the report. Do access the atlas. As I said, it is a resource of public good, and we need your contribution. So I'd really ask you to add into it as well and share it through your networks. You can find it on Twitter, etc. Otherwise, you can just come to us after the session, and we can point you the right way. But thanks so much again, and thanks to our
thanks so much,
panelists
everyone.
as well.
And do buy the Rewired NFT, guaranteed to go up 10,000%. No, just kidding.
Thanks, everyone.
Cool.
That was great.